Hello and welcome to episode 25 of series 2 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. I just wanted to let you know what we've got coming up in some future episodes of the show. On the 28th of August, which is our next episode, we have an interview with Andrea Scarpula, who is from DHL Americas. Andrea is going to be telling us all about the importance of measuring the impact of internal communications. I know this is something that internal communicators get asked about quite a lot, and is something that is always of interest. At how do we measure the contribution that we are making within our organisations and show a return on investment that organisations are making on internal comms and employee engagement activities. So Andrea is going to be telling us all about her work in that area, and it's something that she's been very passionate about throughout her career in internal communications. And then following that, on the 12th of October, on episode 27, we have an interview with Kirsty Bowen from the Coventry Building Society. Any of you who are familiar with the Institute of Internal Communications in the UK may know Kirsty or know of Kirsty's work. She is involved in the institute, and she's going to be telling us all about internal communication lessons from the pandemic. So we've probably been hearing a lot about the pandemic recently, given we're recording this in the late summer, early autumn of 2021, but Kirsty's got some really useful lessons that I think that we can take from the pandemic, and that certainly she's taken from her experience that we will be able to apply to other internal communications activities going forward in the future. So that's coming out on the 12th of October. I just wanted to make you aware of an event that we're running. It's a few weeks into the future. It's in the beginning of November, but that's not that far away, which is quite scary. At the beginning of November, we've got another one of our free webinars coming up. This is on the 4th of November, which is at 3:00 in the afternoon UK time. And we're running a webinar which is all about helping employees understand your organisation's big picture. Particularly important at the moment as we're coming out of all of the restrictions that we've been living under for the last 18 months to 2 years. And the premise behind this is that what we've found in our work is that a lot of business leaders find it difficult to explain the organisation's mission, vision and values to their employees. And no more than now is that important that organisations and employees are kind of connected to that and feeling a sense of purpose coming through this ordeal that we've been through. So the leaders in question are usually quite close to the detail of the story, and it's quite difficult for them to complex. But as we know, and I'm sure you know, that when employees kind of understand the big picture, when they understand how everything fits together, that they tend to be more engaged, they're more connected to the organisation, and they usually produce better results. So in the session, I'm going to be explaining to you how leaders can help their employees and their people within their organisation feel connected to that big picture. I'm going to share with some techniques and tools that we use, and you can hopefully take something away from that you can apply yourself. So it's a free webinar. It's on the 4th of November 2021, 3:00 in the afternoon UK time. You can book that via our website. So if you go to thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, look along the top of the website and you'll see our events tab. If you're on a mobile, you'll see it on the little hamburger menu at the side. Go to events, click on that. You will see the event listed for the 4th of November. You can get some more information on that by clicking on it, and you can go straight to the booking link. It's a Zoom webinar, so you can book directly from the website, and you'll be taken across there. So that's that. Final request. If you've not already done so, please sign up to our mailing list on our website. If you go to engagingic.com, you will see there's a little sign-up form there where you can pop your email address in, and it'll just mean that we can send you some regular updates about the show, what's coming up in future episodes, also let you know when the latest episodes have come out, but also send you some articles and some thought leadership that we've generated that we hope you'll find of interest too. Okay, so let's go on to today's guest. One of the challenges that many internal communicators and employee engagers can probably relate to is how do we help our people to understand our organization's overall purpose, and how do we connect that purpose to people's day-to-day work? None more so has that become an issue during the pandemic. And whilst people are remote working and a lot of people have been sent to work from home, and even if they haven't, have been maybe more spread out and more potentially disconnected than they have been in the past, that connecting people to organizational purpose has become a challenge. Now, in today's interview, we're going to talk to our guest about this very topic, but also to sort of add to that level of complexity, the organization in question was actually integral in the management of the pandemic as well on a national level. So we've got two layers there. We've got an organization that is driving a lot of the policy making and also communication with the general public, but also having to deal with the challenges of a pandemic and very different ways of working, and a significant increase in numbers of people working there as well. So that's what our interviewee today is going to talk about, and it's going to share, I think, some really profound learnings about, regardless of whether we're looking at a pandemic situation or a crisis in the future, there's some really important lessons I think that we can learn here about the importance of helping to keep our people connected to our organization's purpose at all times, and making that a priority to make sure that they understand that why we get out of bed every morning and how my role contributes to that is a significant part of our role as internal communicators and employee engagers. So I hope you find today's interview useful for that. Niall Ryan helps to create work environments where employees can love the work that they do and have a great working relationship and be proud of the company that they work for. Niall helps companies achieve that by creating a workplace experience based around his 20 years of experience in internal communications, employee experience design, employee engagement, and culture change for some of the world's leading consumer brands. Most recently, Niall has been head of internal communications and engagement at the Department of Health and Social Care and has worked in similar roles at ASDA, Harrods, and Liberty. So, hello, Niall. How are you?
I'm very good, Craig. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Just for the benefit of the listeners, where in the world are you at the moment?
At the moment, I am in Manchester, a very cloudy day. But yeah, the norm for up north at the moment.
Nothing unusual. For those of you who are listening from outside of the UK, Manchester is renowned for its inclement weather, but has many other wonderful features as well. Which
I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Exactly, that more than offset the weather and I've been in Manchester when it's been sunny as well. So that's a gross generalisation, but generally speaking. So let's just. I know you've I said your most recent role was at the Department of Health and Social Care, but I know you've kind of moved on. But just tell us a little bit about that as your most kind of recent, kind of a long-term experience and what you were doing there and what your role entailed.
Yeah, so I joined the Department of Health in April 2020. At the height of the pandemic, and the Department of Health and Social Care was a government department sort of right at the centre of that. And my role was to set up the internal comms and engagement function at the department, where at that moment in time, it didn't really have any resources in place.
Right.
And so my role was at quite a pivotal time to get things set up really quickly within the organisation, get a team set up and sort of processes and practices, etc.
Right. So there was no actual internal comms team, or wasn't formed when you were there before you joined. No?
There was one in 2019, and at the end of 2019, there's just been some changes within the department, etc.
Right.
And of course, pandemic hits, and the department goes, "Oh, cripes." We're in trouble. We need to communicate with lots of people really quickly and effectively. So hence myself and my team coming in.
Yeah. Wow. So kind of a real, and again, an immediate need for that role. Hence why you were brought in. And obviously, you as I mentioned earlier, you've got considerable experience outside of that. So we'll be drawing upon all of your career experience, not just that most recent. But I thought it's interesting. And I think when we spoke originally, anyway, we'd said that one of the things that we, in that role, as you said, you've kind of been brought in to help the organisation communicate at a time when communication was really kind of brought to the fore for many
Mm-hmm.
organisations. But you also talked about, I guess, what was the challenge was there is that you grew, and I guess again, just to put this into context, the department you were working at was kind of front and centre of the whole management of the pandemic from a governmental basis. So you grew from, I think you said, from 1,200 to 4,000 people during that period. And obviously one of the challenges there, which is what we're going to focus on today, is how you onboard and bring people into that kind of organizational purpose when you can't actually, well, you can see them, but you can't actually physically, be together in the same place, and where everyone's working remotely. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about that kind of experience that you went through there, with that kind of significant growth, and also being kind of in a role or in an organization that was absolutely critical to the management of the pandemic, and some of the challenges that brought for you?
Yeah, so the Department of Health and Social Care, it has got the Health and Social Care mandate. So, of course, it's supporting the NHS, social care across the UK, etc. And then it found itself with numerous other competing demands, PPE, test and trace, the Joint Biosecurity Unit, etc. And of course, you've highlighted the vast number of people then who had to come into the department really quickly. And probably those extra people, half were from other government departments, drafted in to just help out, and probably another 1,000 people were from the private sector. So we had a real mix of people who were trying to understand sort of the healthcare landscape, as well as people who were trying to understand the civil service and sort of government ways of working, etc. And the one thing that became front and center quite quickly was, as it was called in the department, the COVID battle plan.
Right.
So yes, there was a strategy in the organisation naturally, and we had manifesto commitments, as they call them, in terms of objectives to deliver. But obviously what took precedence was the COVID battle plan, which of course was orchestrating the activities of test and trace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge was just to try and get that message across to all these people, which again in the department predominantly had been a work on site organisation, to then basically flipping to being completely remote for all employees. So our challenge was to help employees understand the organisation really quickly, what their role was, what was expected of them, because everything was at a fast pace. And then what was also coming later was that sort of bigger picture piece in terms of what everyone was doing to fit into delivering the COVID battle plan, as well as, of course, the core of what the department was there to do in terms of our manifesto commitments.
Yeah, and because I guess it's always interesting in situations like that, isn't it? Is that the kind of, it's always a good test of how robust and accurate that purpose is when you get put under a pressure like that to deliver something very short term. Is that purpose still? So I mean, in terms of the purpose of the department, what was the kind of overarching raison d'etre for that department that you were trying to articulate, and how did that fit in with that kind of immediate sort of short term strategy?
Well, the overall purpose of the Department of Health and Social Care is to lead the health and care system to help people live more independent, healthier lives for longer.
Yeah.
So actually the pandemic, well, that's why the Department of Health and Social Care was at the centre of all of this activity. So it wasn't as though there was a different strategy per se, as in a different purpose. It's just the COVID battle plan, as I would refer to it, was very sort of acutely targeted activities with very specific timelines and ownership and deliverables, etc., that needs to be delivered. Quite different to probably the normal sort of strategic delivery in an organisation. So it was still relevant. It obviously was just, there was a very sharp focus on specific things that need to be done. And obviously the aim was to protect people's lives, which still fitted in with the overall purpose of the organisation. So thankfully, there wasn't an incongruence within the organisation.
No, absolutely not. No, and I think that's really important. And so what were some of? I mean, I guess from a sense of urgency perspective and feeling as though you're doing something useful, I think that probably wasn't one of your challenges. I think probably people got that, or was that an issue? Was it that people kind of didn't necessarily see a connect with, particularly if they're working on maybe some of the more kind of finer details of this battle plan, that how does that helping us with the pandemic? Did you feel that was always apparent for people and that wasn't necessarily something you had to kind of attend to, or was it something that you had to be mindful of?
I think at that micro level, as an internal comms function, we were doing socialization of the battle plan within the organization. But one of the things that did happen in the organization is when we were onboarding people into the organization, yes, you had your standard induction, which was rapid, but managers were onboarding their teams very, very fast to understand you're here to do a specific task. These are the people that you need to know, work with, etc. Here, the deliverables, where the battle plan was broken down into sort of quite minute levels of detail. And so I think people's level of ownership and understanding of their ownership was quite clear.
Yeah.
Probably it was when it came later, when we're sort of on the journey of delivering the COVID battle plan, and like the rest of the country, we're going through the different waves of lockdowns and all the rest, etc. We were then starting to think, okay, all of this activity is feeding into our overall purpose, and of course, we still had objectives to deliver as a department.
Yeah.
In addition to the battle plan, but that onboarding activity was something that at that local level with managers. We say many organisations, we want our managers to sort of pay a lot of attention to that. But in the department, that is something that it happens through necessity, because for managers and leaders, the effort they put into that paid back really quickly in terms of getting action done and delivered, especially in an environment where there's a huge amount of scrutiny, not just on the Department of Health and Social Care, but all sort of agents and departments that are involved in the delivery.
And was that something? So that onboarding, was that was a process that you were involved in? Because normally that's kind of an HR training and development. Were you involved in that? That
was
process?
A tandem affair with HR and with internal comms. So
Brilliant.
Sort of clear understanding about sort of what we could pick up as an internal comms function afterwards. So we had a lot of targeted communications to help people understand, all those important things about like ways of working, systems, all that kind of stuff. So that's really important signposting, getting that out to people really quickly. So that wasn't there weren't barriers to people in terms of getting their job done.
Yeah. So what were some of the tools, and because internal comms people always like to know about tools and techniques and channels and that sort of thing. What were some of the go-to approaches, channels, particular ways you found to be really effective when it came to making sure that everybody was on that sort of same page and kind of coordinated and onboarded as quickly as possible? What did you find really worked really well?
Well, this probably won't surprise a lot of people, but and we take it for granted, but our intranet became quite pivotal for us as an organisation. So there's a lot we had to do, not a huge amount, but a number of things we had to do quite quickly on our intranet in terms of sort of signposting, and especially around our purpose piece, and particularly within the purpose organisation was around the structure of the organisation and who did what. And organizational charts, as an example, became one of our most searched items. So, which, not a surprise really when you have nearly 3,000 extra people coming into the department who are trying to navigate their way to who do I need to talk to right now, who does what, etc. So, but that was a very tactical thing to do in the intranet. But we had lots of other content on our intranet, as many organizations, around COVID, around the COVID, as in COVID guidelines, because obviously those guidelines were important to employees as people affected by the pandemic. So we were doing just as much work on that as every other organisation in the UK. Again, the internet just became a pivotal point for that. What we found was that there was other channels that needed to support the internet and sort of, I guess, simplify and break down the volume of content that we have on our internet. So we were relying a lot on our targeted newsletters, which we had our weekly bulletins that would be going out to the organisation. Thankfully, we're having a very high hit rate and read rate and action rate. And also we were supporting that with dedicated bulletins on specific topics within the organisation. And of course, alongside that, which equally important and bringing us back to that purpose piece and our leadership, was we had a very frequent cadence of leadership communications going on
Right.
across the organization. A lot of it actually on Teams calls, as opposed to just more email volume going out to the organization. We tried to get leaders on calls, talking to as many people as possible in the organization. And that, again, was something that was having a very high success rate. More importantly, it was given an opportunity for dialogue within those conversations and question and answers, etc. And we were fortunate, we had people like Chris Whitty, who is in the Department of Health and Social Care. So, of course, a brilliant gentleman who joined our calls, etc., and was able to sort of give that deeper insight story and answer questions within the organization, because it was interesting for me coming into a healthcare organization that these people working within healthcare, they have a different lens on the whole world of what was going on in the pandemic. So not just people affected by this virus, but also people who are trying to support, the UK get through this pandemic, etc. So they proved to be very, very valuable mechanisms of engaging with their employees.
Yeah. Oh, so that's amazing. Yeah, and I think what's come across for me there is it wasn't, kind of yammer and workplace and great tools as they are. It was almost like sort of stick to traditional channels, and we covered intranets in episode 10 on this of this particular series of the podcast, because I think, again, we I think we see intranet sometimes. I mean, my corporate days are long behind me, many years since and again, I guess the intranet was just seen as a bit of a sort of repository for scanned and sort of digitized documents that would normally have been in a kind of company handbook. But I think actually a modern social intranet that's, kind of has the functionality and search functionality that you've talked about there is incredibly important, because you've got to be able to predict. You can't predict everything that people are going to need, but you've got to help them to find it when they do need it. And I think that's really important.
And with our internet, thankfully, it was quite a dynamic internet. And even though we had Teams, etc., we faced a reality just like many other organizations in terms of sort of well-developed sort of social collaboration tools like Workplace, for example, and Teams had just been brought into the business. So as a function, we were trying to sort of get ourselves more mature in those channels, etc. But as our starting point with the internet and supporting newsletter channels and the leadership calls or all staff calls, etc., they worked really well for us. And to be quite honest, it was appreciated by our audience. Naturally, you'd have expected us to measure it. And it was definitely our leadership calls, which became an anchor point within our communications landscape every month.
Yeah. And measurement, is there another thing that internal communicators always like to hear about? Well, how did you measure it? So you've indicated there that there was some sort of metrics that you were using. Well, how did you measure?
Well, on our leadership calls, when they started out within the department, we're probably getting about 800 people, etc. And then probably after about 3-4 months, that started jumping up to about 2,500 plus people. And then we're also looking at actually how are the audience engaging with the conversations with leaders. And again, we would go from places, it might be quite quiet calls, and you only get 20, 30 questions, etc., where by the end, it was getting to 300 to 400 questions, which was great. Of course, you can't accommodate answers to that, but that put us in a process of, okay, let's get answers to that afterwards and get that loop back out to the business.
Okay.
And the same with our newsletter communications. We were using a tool called Wired, but it might be Popular or whatever the companies use. And again, we had lots of diagnostics and data in there to help us understand what kind of content people were using. And the same with our internet as well. So we had quite a good understanding of the kind of content that people were searching. Hence, how we knew that actually organizational charts were number one search.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think it's, again, it kind of comes back to the sometimes we can think we know what people want, but actually what they really want is something we would probably never have even put on our radar, and yet by measuring it and having some kind of clear metrics and visibility, you can kind of pick up on that and help people.
Yeah, and actually a good example of getting a piece of insight about something that you wouldn't expect to find out. It was the organizational charts that led us onto a new avenue of engaging employees in the organization along the same theme of helping people understand who does what in the organization. That led us to devoting a whole sequence of of content to spotlight features on teams,
Yeah.
as well as blogs from various team members, etc.
Right.
In particular, focusing on sort of what do we do, the work we're trying to achieve, the successes we've had, etc. All trying to build that picture up of this organization that was virtual, didn't really know anyone, but sort of creating a sense of collectiveness in terms of our approach to this galvanizing challenge, which was the pandemic.
Yeah. And I think when we spoke originally, you talked about how do we help people who are invisible become visible. Is that what you were alluding to there? This sort of, spotlighting and bringing some stories out.
Exactly. And not just in relation to the topic around our purpose, etc., but as well as, of course, talking about what we had to achieve as an organization. We are an organization that has many people in there, where we had to be aware of well-being issues, and our diversity and inclusion, etc. So, and also we have a smarter working team. So, as we sort of evolved into this very agile way of working, and a thread that was running through all of the work in those teams, including ourselves, was actually how do we make sure that people didn't get lost within the organization. So let's say our smarter working team would work with the wellbeing team to develop line manager guidance to ensure that they really are touching in with the individuals within their team, as well as when they're connecting with their team to make sure that everyone has a voice, or if they don't want to articulate themselves on the call, they have an opportunity to contribute to the conversation, etc. And at a more macro level, we would, as a comms team, we'd be looking at those opportunities to recognize people, which everyone was an unseen person in the organization, but we double down our efforts to revisit our recognition schemes and process, etc. And then how do we showcase them across the department and on our leadership calls, which again, as I said, were becoming quite pivotal. So to have our permanent secretary or second permanent secretary sort of highlighting some of those people within the organization. So again, just really tapping into that, it was easy because you can't see everyone to sort of forget about the actual people who are doing stuff. So again, that's what we were trying to find, as many opportunities as possible to get people visible, and different people, not just the same faces, but just different people for different topics in the organization.
So is that kind of a storytelling, kind of telling people stories about what they'd done and what they'd achieved and how they'd worked and how it kind of built on the purpose, the underlying purpose and values of the organization? Was it that sort of approach that you used?
Yeah, exactly. But also in tandem with that, we were very mindful that it wasn't just about the professional context, but also about the personal context and people's sort of lives, which thankfully with, our D&I work and the wellbeing work, we're able to do sort of lots of activity and campaigns where we could get people engaged just in terms of just, what does their office setup look like at home, or we had something like a Kaido challenge, which is like a sort of physical sports challenge where people from across the organization could take part in and take pictures, etc. So that very social element. So it was definitely from the professional, but also to try and show light to the many new people who were in the department as well.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of that. I mean, I think we're all familiar with that as well. But I think it is one of the positives that's come out of this sort of humanizing experience, particularly, from a kind of leadership perspective of seeing that we're all kind of human beings at the end of the day. We all got a living room and a kind of wall with pictures on and whatever it is, and we're all kind of trying to do the best we can. And I think that sort of not just seeing it as kind of professional stories, but how I'm coping sort of thing has been really good in terms of kind of humanizing organizations, hasn't it? And
but an interesting thing that surfaced actually, which if you don't mind me sharing, was through the research. I'm probably very particular to the department, but through the research on COVID and its impact on society and communities, etc., we had learned probably by May, June last year in the department that learned about sort of the health disparities in certain communities, etc.
Right.
And we had that learning in terms of government research. And again, just thinking about the employees who work in the department, they had a different lens on that. And of course, we had our thinking about from the diversity and inclusion perspective, we had a lot of employees who could relate to that sort of issue of health disparities, through ethnic minorities, etc. So interestingly, where there was lots of conversation going on about the Black Lives Matter in all organisations, and including in the Department of Health, we had a very live and um, buoyant conversation, not just about that, but actually about the health agenda, and what that meant for employees in the organisation. And interestingly, this purpose piece comes back where it wasn't an opportunity. It'd be wrong to say that, but it was an unintended sort of happening where this research came out, and where there's these health disparities, and people in the organisation. That diversity inclusion is not just about us in being different in our organisation, but actually the work that we're doing, and how that can have an impact on so the diversity of people in the UK and the policy making decisions, etc. So it was a very multi-layered sort of conversation. But an example of the kind of conversation that emerged within the organisation that we tried to facilitate, both at that sort of business-wide level and an example of trying to connect people in the organisation, is that's where then we sort of had conversations about race and culture then happening within teams, coffee catch-ups where literally people would just talk about, what did this mean for you? What did you think about the findings in that health report, and Black Lives Matter, etc. So it allowed for that, like you're talking about, that human connection. It also gave an opportunity for people to talk about something other than just the pressures of work.
Yes. Yeah, I can imagine it must be a really, really strange but interesting situation to be in. You're almost, we're being affected by this ourselves, but we're also in a position where we can change how that affects everybody else in society as well. Like you say, it's a kind of an interesting, not paradox is probably the wrong word, but it's a kind of duality, isn't it? That must have been quite an interesting tension to manage.
Well, for our marketing department, and we'll all have seen various communications around test and trace and vaccination, etc. What you just said is a perfect example of that, then literally fed back out into informing how we connect with and communicate to the UK population in a more targeted, more meaningful way, with this realization that we had these disparities, and vaccine hesitancy, etc. These discoveries were instantly informing the department about its actions that it should take.
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing experience. So, I mean, I guess, what we've been trying to do with this show throughout the pandemic, because it started in the pandemic and has kind of been a child of the pandemic, I guess, is to make sure that whatever we talk about has longevity after the pandemic, because I think anything like this does have profound learning opportunities. I mean, from your perspective, hopefully we're not going to be facing a major global crisis again in the next, well, who knows, but not in the imminent future. But I mean, looking back on the last 18 months and what you've learned, and particularly, now you've moved on to a new challenge, what are some of the things that you will kind of sort of highlight and put a red ring around in your learning log from the last 18 months that you'll kind of call upon at some point in the future? You're not necessarily in a crisis management situation, but just as a kind of really all-round professional internal communicator and employee engager.
I think that the first thing that I would say is, I would have always done this as in any other internal communicator, just reinforcing purpose. I think, though, what's just sharpened my focus is the need to make purpose and strategy relevant and meaningful to individuals, to showcase how they're making a difference in what they deliver. And really, actually, it's the end. How do we play that back into the organization, people at the front line who are making this come to life? So it's not about leaders sitting down, deciding this is a strategy, we should go forward, blah, 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 etc. And that's, of course, necessary. But actually, how do you bring that to life? So if anything, probably the pandemic has just reinforced that, but also reinforced that actually it is about employees. How do you make it meaningful? Which is a challenge for many organizations, that strategy can be a bit ethereal and it's not always easy to try and connect it to the front line.
No.
And then the other thing that it's again become more prevalent, probably thinking about the fact that one of the outcomes, and I'm actually now an example of it, my new role is a completely remote role, which is sort of an outcome of the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about how do we make conversations, create an environment where conversations can happen where allow people to bring their whole self to the workplace,
Yeah.
around well-being, D&I, really important. How do we get those feedback mechanisms, and how do we create opportunities for people to be involved in what's happening in the organization, decision-making, etc. Because I'm working in an organization now that predominantly will stay probably 70% remote, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's top of my mind. How do I double down on that kind of focus to make sure that people are still involved in the organization whilst being virtual?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on a team perspective, it just reinforced again for me that it's all about purpose, impact, and feedback. And I found that my teams, it's always been the same for me, and just reinforced that I found my teams are sort of anchor more into, well, what's our purpose in terms of supporting the organization, and what will our impact be, and how do we respond, so quite effectively and quickly to that. So probably my takeaways in terms of organizationally, but also teams I lead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think that's a really, really, and you really kind of resonates with, particularly all of your points, but particularly the first point, which is, it's kind of what our purpose is all about, which is, we believe that people can kind of see how their role contributes to a bigger picture and makes them more likely to go the extra mile, make those decisions that we want them to make when we can't give them all the answers ourselves, and follow the path that's the right way to go in terms of delivering that purpose. And the analogy we often use is a bit like we've given them a load of jigsaw pieces, but we've not bothered to show them the lid of the box, so they've no idea where it all fits together. And I think it's incumbent on us as communicators working with our leadership teams, because I don't think that sometimes, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, I think around the leadership table, they don't always know what the lid of the box looks like themselves, and they need a bit of help to try and kind of be able to articulate that. Or they may know what it looks like, but they can't explain it. And
yeah, exactly, and be clear about what needs to be explained as well.
Yes.
And if I think back to, it has also made me more aware of the fact that as we've gone through this change, but there's changes that will stay, be more remote working in organizations, etc. Is that I think sometimes I have more of a distance between myself and the organization. It doesn't mean that I don't believe in my organization, but just because I'm not in an office connected to people and all that stuff that you do miss from sort of those kind of environments, it makes me feel like I am similar to the frontline employee. If I think back to my retail days, where you had sort of people working in shops, etc., whose job was just to focus on the customer, and they wouldn't be surrounded by, all the organizational stuff and content and communications, because they just wouldn't be. Wasn't really a central part of their day. So they would have been sort of more distant from leadership and management. And weirdly now I find that I'm more conscious of that being remote. I've sort of got a sense of that as well, that I'm not as close to, because, I can't walk past the office of someone or have an instant chat, etc. So I guess it's what I'm saying is I got more of an appreciation for that context of the front line. How do we make things relevant?
Yeah, exactly. More empathetic with their plight, if that's the right word. But yeah. Well, that's been a really, really interesting conversation, and I think one that listeners will find really fascinating, both just from a kind of the management of the situation, but also I think from my perspective, what I've found really enlightening is I think sometimes we sometimes see government and particularly kind of civil servants as being kind of a bit sort of not always up with the kind of at the forefront of technology or communication. And I think what you've highlighted there is absolutely far from the truth. What you're talking about there is some of the most interesting, enlightened internal comms work that I've heard about for some considerable times. I think it's a real credit there, and also a really good way of shouting out about not just the amazing work that was being done by the people working hard, but actually internally the amazing job you were doing in terms of keeping everybody coordinated and on the same page.
Well, I have to give a big up to my team.
Too many names to mention, I'm sure, but yeah. Well, look, that has been absolutely fantastic. Now, really, really interesting conversation there. Just before we wrap up, though, I've got the kind of the question I ask all of my guests coming up, which is, even some of that team who you work with kind of intimately during that whole kind of situation, and obviously your new colleagues who you've got, probably maybe you're just getting to know, but also people who maybe know you and outside of work as well. Something that generally people don't know about Niall Ryan that you're willing to share on air with our listeners. So come on, over to you. What's your secret that you're willing to share with us?
Well, there could be no more random things I could share, but I wouldn't have called it continuous learning for myself, but I realized that actually just something I've done through my personal life as well as at work. I sort of just naturally, I'm always interested in learning new things. So throughout the years, I've learned a random smorgasbord of stuff, such as I learned Russian as a language. I even revisited learning my own heritage language of Irish.
Yeah.
But then in terms of sort of hobby-oriented things, I've done stuff like archery, pottery, calligraphy, judo, and I don't think that list will stop. I sort of one of these magpies. I was going, should I give that a go and see what that's like, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the kind of thing that people maybe wouldn't know very often with me and probably think is a bit random.
Yeah.
I don't care.
No, absolutely not.
Random's good when work life is probably quite structured, etc. Outside of work, I don't mind a bit of random.
Yeah. Oh no, I think eclectic interests are. Or I'm not going to. I mean, it's not my interview. It's yours. I've got a very eclectic interest as well. So I completely, agree with that.
Tell us one.
One random thing. I'm massively into Star Wars. So it's my kind of one of my guilty pleasures is anything to do with Star Wars. So there you go. I've shared. You're the first guest who's actually asked me to share one of my kind of thing, something that people. I mean, but a lot of my wife knows about it, obviously, because she suffers, and she'll be listening to this podcast as well. But yeah, no, it's one of my kind of. It's something I was really interested in as a kid, and over the last few months, in the sort of monotony of lockdown, has just become something I've become quite obsessed
super
with.
Fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then added to that, cycling, playing guitar, similar sort of eclectic mix that you would never, random things that you would never kind of put together.
The things that make us.
Exactly. And as you said, bring your whole self to work and bring your whole self to work and kind of, sense of belonging and all that. I think it's really important. Good. Well, look, that's been absolutely brilliant, Niall. I'll, if it's okay with you, I'll put your LinkedIn URL in the show notes, which are on our website. So if anyone does want to reach out to you and connect with you and talk to you about your eclectic interests and maybe send you some Russian emails or whatever, show you.
God, now I'll be tested. Cool. I'll deal with whatever. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with whoever.
No, wonderful. No, well, look, I really appreciate you giving up your time, particularly as I know you're in a kind of transitionary. Well, you're in a new role, which is in a few weeks into a new role. So massive respect for you for kind of sticking to your promise to be on the show. So I really appreciate that, Niall, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the year and in your new position. And obviously, be lovely to catch up with you at some point in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much for inviting me along to this.
Been an absolute pleasure, Niall. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you. So, thank you for listening to Engaging Internal Comms. Hope you found this episode useful. We'd love to get your feedback and thoughts about the show. So, and also any questions or ideas that you've got for things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. So you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can get in touch with us via the contact form on our website, which is engagingic.com. Also, you'll be able to sign up for our mailing list there, and we'll send you relevant news about the show, new episodes, and also anything that we think you might be interested in when it comes to internal communications or employee engagement. If you like the show and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to it via your podcast service. And also you can subscribe to it via the links on our podcast page, which again is engagingic.com. If you know anyone else who might be interested in the show, please distribute it to them. Please let them know about it. We want to try and grow a community of people here who are contributing to the show, giving us new ideas for episodes and things that you'd like to cover in future. So thank you very much.